As a young lad, I had an N64. I'd read my Nintendo official magazine with anticipation, checking out the screenshots for up-and-coming games, reading the reviews, and then sighing in frustration at the release dates, which were often months after the American and Japanese releases, if not years. I'd save my pennies for those special Fridays, and then after school I'd head over to my local game shop. And when a good new game came out, I'd be overjoyed for a little while. Then I'd finish the game or I'd get tired of it, and that would be it. The exception of multiplayer games, I didn't really often go back to revisit old games unless they were favourites, like the Ocarina of Time, and usually that anticipated second playthrough would peter out long before the ending credits. When games don't really change, they've got limited replay value. Of course, PC gamers were having quite the different experience, particularly those playing multiplayer and online games. As I grew up, I began to game more and more on the PC. I fell in love with Warcraft 3 Reign of Chaos, which portrayed more complex characters than I was used to. Characters who were often neither good nor evil, they struggled with corruption and changed as they went. I was blown away as a kid and I couldn't wait for a sequel. But I wouldn't have to wait for one. A year later, gracefully a week before my birthday, Warcraft 3 The Frozen Throne dropped into my local game store like a gift from the gods. In the interim, I'd become an avid player of the multiplayer modes, and as the expansion pack installed, I eagerly read the included booklet with each new unit like a present unto itself. Suddenly my favourite game was bigger, better. My orcs had a new way to heal in the form of spirit walkers, which for those of you who don't know, are albino cowfolk who can bring back units from the dead, and freaking kamikaze bat-riding trolls. But the most attractive thing to me was the first option in the menu, the new campaign. Suddenly, the ending of Reign of Chaos wasn't the end of those characters I'd fallen in love with. The balance of power shifted as Arthas began to lose control of his undead, with some of them regaining their minds and splitting off to form the Forsaken. And to me as a kid, these were bold plot twists, and they're plot twists that are perfect for a second season, so to speak. But I was still fundamentally playing the same game. Like, I didn't have to learn any new controls, I knew how to use most of the existing units. So I was hitting my stride coming into this expansion. I felt like an expert. Even though, as a kid, I was terrible at games, especially real-time strategy. But the expansion allowed me to keep playing through a brand new story with gameplay I already loved. They built on the existing foundations of Warcraft 3 to climb even higher with new goals and objective types. I was hooked. Within a couple of weeks, I devoured all 4 of the new campaigns and would begin to venture back online and into the realm of custom games. I would play Warcraft 3 for years to come, mostly through fresh content created by modders. Now, in 2021, I don't have to wait even a year for content updates to my favourite games. Once limited to PC games, now any successful game on any platform will probably see extra content. And we've seen some criticism of this model as a source of unending crunch for developers, but this has changed the face of game development, and this is the way games are made now. With the rise of early access games, we can now often play games across an entire life cycle, from long before you would call them complete with an ending and credits and all of the bosses, to release, and then long after release with all the extra years of content, DLC, free content. And the difference is often really dramatic, such that release reviews aren't really definitive assessments anymore. Within a few months or years, the game could look and play like a different title. It's true that these new models of development have been controversial, abused as they have been by some large publishers. Whether it's abandoning true expansions for overpriced cosmetics or never letting the developers leave crunch, some implementations of the model have certainly left a bad taste in our mouths. But for some developers, it's allowed them to follow their passions and create games that are art, not just products. I mean, look at Crate Entertainment. Once the developers of the Diablo-like Titan Quest, they were left jobless after the dissolution of Iron Lore Entertainment. Their new game, Grim Dawn, was, for them, the continuation of something they never wanted to stop doing to begin with. The Kickstarter was a success, and Titan Engine in tow, they created Grim Dawn. But they went further than fulfilling their original promise to backers. They kept working on the game for another 5 years. Revisionism has ever been the ally of writers and auteurs, and while it has at times been a devil on the shoulder of creators, George Lucas, it allows those whose vision has been limited by time, budget, or other constraints to realize their vision. In many cases, games that are lauded today as masterpieces wouldn't exist if not for this possibility. I mean, look at Final Fantasy XIV and its rags to riches story, from complete critical and commercial failure to the most subscribed MMORPG of the current day. I'd like to narrow down and talk about a single fascinating example. The Total War Warhammer series, henceforth to be known as Total Warhammer because it's just easier and it makes sense. I don't know what they were thinking. Branding. Anyway, when I saw that they planned to release the game in 3 parts, I did kind of raise an eyebrow. I brought to mind the .hack series of games, which was essentially one game, but released in 4 separate full-priced parts. Also kind of thinking about the way they're treating the Final Fantasy VII remake currently, or, the Hobbit trilogy, which felt like spreading a thin bit of book over far too much film toast. My cynicism towards the Total Warhammer series was only compounded by the fact that the second game released a mere year after the first game, and was again full price. And yet people continued to rave about the quality of the game. Didn't they know they were being exploited? I mean, there's a DLC to add blood, for hell's sake, in a Warhammer game. Nonetheless, the game piqued my interest. I mean, I love fantasy, and while the Warhammer franchise holds no special place in my heart, the opportunity to play as or control races like the Lizard Men in games will always draw me in. And, I've already played Endless Legend to death, which was one of my favourite in terms of fantastical races. So, a couple of years into the Total War Warhammer franchise, I dipped my cynical toe into the waters, and I fell in love. Of course. I'd played a Total War game once before in Shogun, but at the time I kind of bounced off due to the dizzying interface and scope of the game. But having found my way into the strategy genre through Endless Space, and furthered my interest with the increasing complexity of its sequels and expansion packs, I was ready now for something a little more daunting. Something to really sink my teeth into. Total War Warhammer? Great game. I tried the Greenskins first, and then the Empire. And I just loved the way each race felt completely different to play, both on the campaign and the battle side. When the orcs get blood drunk enough on continuous warfare, they summon an entire army of battle roadies to follow the main army, which is controlled by AI. And while I'm not a huge Warhammer fan, or I wasn't prior to playing the game, I've always loved the dumb greenskin lore and pointing my wahs in the vague direction of enemy settlements and then watching the carnage. Luckily for me, greenskins aren't a micro-heavy army. It felt like every ridiculous kind of Red Goes Faster story I've ever been told by my Warhammer friends. Side note, I am a huge fan of asymmetry in games. This is partly what I love about Endless Legend. Like, different flavors of human? Boring. Underground scientist Vikings versus consumptive mutant insects and mink shrew folk who changed their entire stats from summer to winter? Awesome. So, of course, I wanted to play every race in Total Warhammer. And next up on my list were the vampires. My body was ready. And it's around that time that my endlessly Googling ass became curious as to the additions of the second game. See, once I get a bite of something I like, I want more. It was Warcraft 3 all over again. I already knew that the overall plan of the Total Warhammer series was to create a sort of mega game that contained all 3 individual titles. Turns out the second game wasn't just more of the same. When I actually installed Total Warhammer 2, I was staggered, because all of the old races had been completely overhauled. So, dwarves, for example, could now craft, and those vampires I'd wanted to try out, well, now they had an entirely new faction mechanic. Basically, by defeating the leaders of other factions, I was able to awaken new vampiric bloodlines, which came with a brand new army leader and some bonuses in that leader's flavor. And another great thing was that through research I could make zombies, and later skeletons, completely free to recruit and maintain. So it really gave me a vibe that my armies were expendable and that their destruction meant nothing to me. Compared to the first game, the races felt fully realised. I sunk a couple dozen hours into that vampire campaign, And it was a blast to see my legions grow to overtake the human and dwarven kingdoms, but I'd not covered even a quarter of the map. Meanwhile, Creative Assembly were releasing more content. They overhauled the human empire, adding a new system of confederation that gave the empire a feel that was a little more political and internally focused than the other factions. They added a heretofore sidelined faction of pirate zombies, replete with zombie-carrying bats, exploding bloater zombies, and giant enemy cannon crabs. The Lord Packs, each of which added 2 new playable leaders for existing factions, and a number of new units for said factions, continued to grow in ambitiousness. Nakai the Wanderer was a lizardman lord who completely eschewed settlements, instead offering them as tribute to a caretaker faction in return for bonuses to his roaming nomad armies. A completely free lord, Imric, gave the High Elves a brand new campaign focused on awakening and enthralling unique legendary dragons. Fans joked that it was a gotta catch them all campaign. It got to the point where I bizarrely began to wonder if I should stop playing the game. I didn't dislike Total War Warhammer 1 when I'd first played it. And it wasn't as though years had passed between playing the first and second game, more like weeks. But now, looking back from the sequel to the first game, it seemed janky. The second game had polished things so much, added so generously in terms of mechanics, that I would never go back and play Total Warhammer the first. Not while its sequel included all the same content, but was improved in pretty much every single way. There were still so many factions I'd yet to play. The Beastmen were one, and yet they were one of the few factions who'd not yet been updated since the first game. And I knew that they would play kind of janky and bad compared to the other races which had been updated. I actually did dip in and play a Beastman campaign for a little bit, and then it just felt like, I'd rather play them when they're complete. So I put off playing that campaign, waiting for an improvement. And at the time of writing, the Beastmen have finally been scheduled an overhaul to coincide with the latest Lord Pack, which obviously isn't going to be that much before the release of Total Warhammer 3. It's a similar problem to when you play games in early access. Everything's unpolished, and often you won't fancy playing it through a second time. It was with this mindset that I began to question playing the game at all. Total Warhammer 1 and 2 were, from a certain standpoint, unfinished games. If every faction was to be overhauled, the map to be expanded, and empty zones to become inhabited, why not wait and play them in their greatest form? I didn't ultimately stop playing, but it did make me think about the strange unintended consequences of the development models we've adopted. It's become commonplace now for games to get re-releases as complete editions, implying that the rest of the time we're playing incomplete editions. Is that a bad thing? Hot take, I don't think so. At least, I don't think it's always bad. When we talk about an idea so ubiquitous as continued development of games, I don't think we can paint in such monochrome colours. While I do expect a large segment of the industry, namely the largest and most profit-driven publishers, to take the model to a kind of hellish logical conclusion, I can't help but be glad that some of my favourite games get to exist in forms they otherwise couldn't. Total War Warhammer is dreaming of something that would be just too prohibitively expensive to release as a single product. As the game grows, it's evolving into something with not just a huge amount of content, but a huge amount of quality, because it's had the time to iterate and go back and improve things. I mean, look at Dwarf Fortress. Could that have been created in a normal development cycle? So, the game exists because of continued development. A stark difference from simply thinking, what can we add to this game? Because, yes, for many single-player games, the answer seems to be bloat. Not every game can or should be expanded in a way that adds good value for the player. I bought many an expansion pack to later realise I wasn't actually interested in another 10 hours of the exact same gameplay. You love it when you start playing, but they have a limited lifespan. So I don't think revisionism is a fit for all games, but I will accept the bad if I get to play the likes of Grim Dawn, Hades, and Total War Warhammer 2. Thank you so much for watching all the way through my video. If you have, and if you're hearing this, wow, well done. This is the first video I've ever edited and uploaded, so if you liked it, please let me know by leaving a like or a comment. And if you didn't, tell me why, please. More content is coming, so if you enjoyed this, have a click of that subscribe button and have yourself a great day.